Hello, everyone. This is Sam Stecker, Superintendent at East Butler Public Schools, bringing to you another episode of the NCSA Radio Podcast. NCSA is the Nebraska Council of School Administrators. It is your premier organization in the great state of Nebraska to increase your professional acumen if you're in educational leadership. And today, we got a gentleman with me named Jay. Hey, Jay.
Hey, Sam.
It's good to see you. Would you mind?
It's great to see you.
Right on. Would you mind, for the people that don't know, introduce yourself?
Certainly. Jay Dostal, high school principal at Kearney High School in wonderful Kearney, America.
America.
Finishing up my 6th year as a principal. Prior to that, I was a assistant principal at Millard North High School and Millard Public Schools. And prior to that, I was an English and physical education teacher at Millard West High School.
Right on. And I'll get this out of the way right away, just so people know, because and the people that listen to the podcast know that Mike and I try to seek out good stories to tell, people that are doing great things. And you were recently recognized in a formal way for some of the great things you've done. Jay, did you win an award?
I did. I'm very humbled to have won the Nebraska State Association of Secondary School Principals Principal of the Year. And we'll be representing the great state of Nebraska in Washington, D.C. in September.
But wait, are you previously familiar with that award in some capacity?
Well, I think our local newspaper may have gotten a little bit different. I was actually recognized as Principal of the Year by the Nebraska State Student Councils in 2013. So the students voted for me 3 years ago, and my peers voted for me this time. So again, very, very humbling experience.
And well-deserved, I might add.
Well, thanks, Sam. I appreciate it.
Well, Jay and I are here at the Nebraska Department of Education AQUEST Conference. It's how we had a chance to catch up here in Kearney, Nebraska. So I thought this would be a great opportunity for us to sit down and talk. And also, if you listen to the podcast, you all will know I'm trying to establish the tradition when we talk to people. Jay, tell me about your favorite teacher you ever had.
Well, you told me to prepare for this, and I thought that driving in here, I thought I'd tell you, well, I can't single it down to just one. Mm-hmm. So I'm gonna kind of ramble here for you.
That's all right.
Honestly, the two best teachers I've ever had in my entire life were my parents, who also happened to be teachers in the Omaha Public Schools. My dad was an industrial technology teacher. My mom was a special education teacher. But in reality, the best teacher I ever had was Tom Hall at Omaha Westside. He was head basketball coach. He was defensive coordinator. He was a track coach. And he taught English, of all things, which really got my juices flowing when it comes to the English language, which I know you really love as well.
Absolutely.
So Tom was a great mentor. He rode you pretty hard, but he was a great man who really got you fired up about learning the English language, which a lot of our kids need these days, because I don't know if they necessarily like English.
Right on. Next question I have for you, Jay, is you have had, I would say, a pretty challenging year, but not a challenging year, a challenging process in that you are on the brink of stepping into a new office at a brand new school, which I had been in Kearney when this initiated a long time ago. This has been a long process from conception to a couple of different bond initiatives to finally getting to the point where the voter says, yes, we are going to build a new Kearney High School, and we're coming into the spring, which will be followed by the fall, where you walk into that place as principal of a brand new building with your ginormous student body. So tell me this, Jay. What advice do you have? Because my guess is this won't be the last new school that's ever built in the state of Nebraska, and another principal is going to have to deal with this at some point in time. What advice do you have on managing that whole process, that whole beast of transitioning to a brand new building?
Well, hindsight's 20/20. I wish that I could tell you that I will follow the advice that I'm about to give, but it actually didn't happen. Because the process of building a new school and being involved is what I like to refer to as a second full-time job.
That makes sense.
With all the construction meetings and the planning and the furniture and just the logistics of running a brand new high school and trying to figure out how that's going to look, it's really tough. But I guess the advice that I would give to myself, my former self 3 years ago, would be to establish boundaries and expectations.
This might be advice that applies not just to opening a new high school, Jay.
Just in administration in
Yes.
general. We had a Board of Education meeting last night, and I was recognized by our board for the award, and wanted my family to come. And
Saw Mel post that on Facebook.
Mel
I thought
posted
that was
on
pretty sweet.
Facebook. It was. But one thing happened that I wasn't anticipating to happen, and I know this is kind of shocking for you. Will be shocking for you to hear, but as I was standing at the podium talking with the board, I was going to introduce my lovely wife and my 2 children, and I turned around and caught a glimpse of my kids, and I started breaking down.
Oh, I'd have
crying.
bawled like a baby, man.
And I'm looking at my 7th grade daughter, and I'm looking at my 4th grade
Yeah.
son, and I'm thinking,
That's too
when
cool.
we started this process,
Yeah.
my daughter was in 4th grade,
That's just crazy to think about, isn't
and
it?
my son was in 1st grade,
Uh-huh.
and where did the time go?
Yeah,
And,
yeah.
I think it's not just the building project. I think it's perfectly relevant to this, but just administration in general, that you establish those boundaries and expectations, because even though you have, in my case, I have 1,400 kids at Kearney High School that I care deeply about and want them to be successful, and all of my staff members who are part of my work family, you sometimes lose track of the people who mean the most to you at home. And I'm not saying that I missed out on a lot over the past 3 years, but there were some things that I missed out on just because I didn't set appropriate boundaries and expectations. So when I read the NCSA posts on the Google community for new administrators,
Yes.
I think this is a prime example of something that you need to do, is establish those boundaries and expectations and understand that you can't be everything to everyone all the time.
And people will respect you for that, because everybody's got a family in some capacity. Everybody has people they take care of beyond their professional service, whether it's in education or not. And I tell you what, if you have to set those boundaries and you express that to somebody and say, I'm not going to be able to do this because I've got to take care of these other obligations in my family, if people don't respect that, I think it's a good indicator whether you're working with the right people or not.
Right. Well, and I think this was the year after you left Kearney High to take on the elementary principal position in the district. But one of the things that I'd gotten advice from a colleague of mine was, you're preaching setting boundaries and expectations to your staff, but yet you're the one who's answering emails at 10, 11 o'clock at night. And so if you are preaching it, but you're not practicing it yourself, what kind of example are you setting?
Of course. Those darn emails are time-stamped, aren't they?
I put "Do Not Disturb" now on my phone, so I will not
like
get
it. That's good.
texts or emails
Outstanding.
buzzing on my phone after 8 o'clock.
Gotta have some limits. In talking about your new building, the new building for Kearney High School, I know one of the initiatives that you're really excited about is your small learning communities. Why don't you give us a little bit of background on how that vision of the small learning communities came to be, and then from your own personal perspective, what are you most excited about the small learning communities?
That vision started 3 years ago, prior to the bond issue even passing. I think one of the things that, if you ever have the opportunity to open up a brand new school, it's great if you can have the educational model in place before the architects get their hands on it, because in most cases the architects will say, here's a building, and then school, you have to fit your educational model to it. The great thing in our case was we had the educational model. We went to architects and said, build a school that fits around this. So, we went through the revisions process, which we just got done presenting here at AQuest on. And one of the things you hear about a lot from your community is, your kids need this. Our kids need to be doing this, or they're coming out of school and they're not prepared for this. And schools are kind of getting a raw deal, but we've also set ourselves up for that too, because the revisions process actually caused us to stop and, for lack of a better term, shut up and listen.
Yes.
And, I constantly remember a quote that I have heard, that you should get tattooed on the inside of your wrist the words, "They might be right," so that whenever you're having a conversation, you can just look at your wrist and you're like, yeah, you know what, they might be right.
Yeah.
And I think that resonates with this whole process, because when you stop and you listen to your community and the business and industries tell you this is what we need, and truly listen and you become actionable to them, you create this really powerful experience within your school community, one in which the folks in your community trust you, that you're going to do your job, but at the same time, as a school, you know that what you're doing is going to prepare them for life in your community. You know, they might go off and do some post-secondary stuff, but if you give them opportunities right out of high school, or in high school, to work at a machine shop down the street, and they have a good experience there, even if they go back to school, go to school, they might come back if they know a job's awaiting there.
Absolutely.
So that's the whole impetus behind small learning communities, and I guess the part that I'm most excited about is, and I've used this a lot with the community, is, when that kid walks across the stage, and I'm the last person that shakes their hand before they walk back down to their seat and they have their diploma in hand, and I can say, what are you going to do? And instead of getting, I don't know, they go, you know what, I had a really good experience in health sciences or skilled in technical sciences, and I've got these skills that I know are going to be marketable in this place, and I've got a future. I like that answer a whole lot better than I don't know. So that's what I'm excited about.
That's a great thing to be excited about. I can remember back when the high school bond passed. You and I were both down at the Merriman Performing Arts Center, because that's when I was elementary principal at Emerson here in Kearney, and we knew early that it passed.
Absolutely.
The votes were coming in, and it was not your typical bond election. It was a landslide.
It was 60%.
And I remember shaking your hand and saying, Jay, congratulations, and I'm sorry.
I remember that too, Sam.
Because I knew you expressed it very well earlier in this podcast. It's like having a second job. So I know that you've had that, and on top of that, I remember late last year, around this time, a little bit earlier, all of a sudden there was a an article in a South Dakota newspaper about your present superintendent. It has accepted a different position a little bit late. So the leadership that you had been following in Dr. Maher, who was instrumental, I think, in that landslide victory for that bond election, and obviously also had a vision for what the process was going to look like, was seizing another opportunity, and then it was somewhat in question who was going to be superintendent. And then you have the wonderful Dr. Moon comes in as interim superintendent. I think has done an outstanding job here in Kearney Public Schools, but yet another transition. And then, because you and I talk no small amount, life doesn't stop. Whether that's personal life or all the professional demands that you have, that you expect. And then, Jay, have you had some things now and then professionally that you didn't expect? Yeah, that happens as well. Our last podcast episode, in talking with John from Norris, John, a piece of advice he gave was, dude, I run. That's my happy place. That's my zen. That's where I am going to get everything centered. And that's where I'm going to take care of myself so that I'm able to serve everyone else. So, Jay, here's my question, because, just like you said before, setting some limits, having your email, I'm not going to send this at 10 o'clock at night. What advice do you have for people in education and leadership? Say, if you're going to take care of yourself, here's something that you need to do. Are you going to say pickleball?
That's a good question. Well, pickleball might be one of them. Which I heard it did not work out well for you.
No, if the sport involves, in case you're not in on the inside joke here on the podcast, here at AQuest, my good friend Clint Edwards, who's an assistant principal, invited me to sub in on a little informal pickle game since Jay couldn't make it. And if a sport involves a ball and you are either required to throw the ball, catch the ball, or hit the ball with a foreign object, Sam is not proficient. I stepped in for Jay, not admirably, in a pickleball game. Anyway, carry on, Jay.
Well, I think that I learned long ago that anybody in education needs to have some sort of hobby, because when they leave education and they have spent all this time working with kids, and they age really quickly. I've seen it. I've seen educators that I've worked with who retired, who didn't have a hobby, that started looking pretty old pretty quick because they spent all this time working with kids, which is rejuvenating and keeps you young. But then the second that's taken away from your life and you don't have anything, that's a tough deal. I wish I could tell you that I was a runner.
Neither of us are runners.
I
Jay.
have
There's
this
no
conversation
secrets
with
there.
my assistant principal all the time. She likes to run all the time. I said, you know what? I'll really only run unless I'm being chased.
Yep, I'm with you.
I like golf. I really like golf. Play a lot of golf, but in Nebraska, there's a few months out of the year where that's not
Golf's
gonna
not
happen.
really an option then.
Pickleball is a nice getaway.
Yeah.
I'm not very good at it, but we have a good time. But one of the things that I think is therapeutic to me is I do a lot of reading, and I do a lot of reading of stuff about my profession. A lot of people are like, no, it's getting away from it. No, it's not about getting away from it. I mean, it's part of me. This is who I am, and I really like reading about latest trends in education, what's working, what's not working. I like sharing that, through Twitter and through Facebook and that sort of thing. But that's I think I spend probably upwards of an hour and a half every night doing reading regarding my profession, and outside of that, I love spending time with my kids when I get the time, even though
There you
they're
go.
very strong-willed and independent children who
Where do they get that from?
I have no idea. And so they might not want to spend a lot of time with me, but it's been cool watching them grow up. So
I'm going to throw one more question at you that I didn't give you a heads up on this one, but I think you're going to do just fine.
Okay.
Because you mentioned Twitter, which I complimented John last time on the podcast and this as well. He's a very connected educator. You are also in that group. There is no small amount of people that you reach out to. And you mentioned Twitter, and you also, this is from a blog post, which, by the way, haven't mentioned this. If you want to check out Jay's blog, a view from the principal's desk blogspot.com. And I think you picked this up from a speaker at an NCSA or NSAB convention. I remember you talked about this, that you ought to know quite a few people that are better at your job than you.
absolutely.
And you wrote a really good blog about that. So you seek out a lot of people. You're very connected. You continue to read. Who is somebody that everybody in education in Nebraska ought to be following?
Ooh, that's a tough one.
I figure it's tough for you because you have probably a list.
I do. I have a lot of go-to people. I mean, there's no shortage of people that I can call, and I look at those connections a little bit differently. There are people that I follow on Twitter that provide a lot of really cool information, but then there are people that I call on the phone when I need some guidance and some experience and that sort of thing. So it's kind of like you ask me, what's your favorite movie of all time? And I'll tell you, I don't have a favorite. I have a top 10. But
that's a J answer for sure.
It is a J answer for sure. But I'm going to give you a person that maybe not so much on Twitter, but just in terms of blogging and is on Twitter for some parts, but did a lot of work with Nathan Eklund and Eklund Consulting, who writes a lot about school climate and culture. And Sam, you know this just because you had experience at Kearney High working with me. I think that school culture is the bedrock, the foundation of everything that we do. Because without relationships, without a positive school culture where people enjoy coming to school every day, you're not going to be able to do any type of educating. So that's why it's so important to me. And I had a very rocky first year as a principal, and you were there to witness that. And I knew it was rocky at the end of the year when I got my end of the year evaluation. And
we've all been there, my friend.
We've all been there. But I realized at that point that I needed to make some changes in my own leadership style, and I committed to it. And I knew that the only way that we were going to be able to do that is with culture. And so I reached out to a guy that I knew that I had met previously, Nathan Eklund, who had worked previously with the Search Institute and with 40 Developmental Assets. And he had transitioned into a place where how can we expect educators to teach kids about 40 assets if they may not have the assets
We
themselves?
have to take care of the teachers.
We have to take care of our teachers.
Take care of the people that are taking care of the
Right.
kids.
And so I think this is a situation where it was just kind of a light bulb moment for me. And so I followed Nathan, and he ended up working with us, and I read his blog quite a bit.
And his book is How Was Your Day at School?
How Was Your
correct?
Day at School?
Which I had my staff my first year at
yeah.
Emerson Reed, and I will always remember, sometimes we just want a sandwich.
Sometimes you just want a sandwich.
And it's a really good book that is full of a lot of good perspective on taking care of yourself and your staff.
And the one that I took away from it, out of his speaking and his book, was being able to punch the shark.
Yes.
And he uses some examples of whether sometimes you are the shark, sometimes others are the shark. And he provides examples like, if the sight of your car when you drive into the parking lot of school in the morning makes you break out in hives, you might be, or you might be somebody's shark.
Yeah.
Or and then the one part that I took to heart, and I asked my lovely bride Melanie, I asked this question because he gave us an assignment. He said, "Go home and ask. If you don't know who your sharks are, go home and ask your significant other who your sharks are, because they're going to be able to tell you." Because you spend all your time talking about that. And it's only when you're able to identify those sharks and be able to punch them or address them, not literally punch them. I like my job, I want to keep it.
Yeah.
That
Punching the shark is a metaphor.
It's a metaphor. But until you can do that, you're really not going to be creating a long-lasting culture.
Makes sense.
You asked me what time it is. I told you how the clock worked with that answer.
Yeah.
But Nathan Eklund would be the person that I would say do some reading on.
Absolutely. I will vouch for that as well. Jay, we're about to wrap up. Anything you want to add before we close up shop today?
You know, I am grateful to be able to work in a state that values education as much as it does. I think that we've got a wonderful professional organization in NCSA. It's allowed me, all the way through the emerging administrators workshops, almost 11 years ago that I went through those, up until now, getting to be able to connect with great people like you, Sam, and Mark Johnson and other folks that are doing great things. And I'm just really excited about where education is at in Nebraska right now and the exciting things that we have on the horizon, because I think something big's coming.
Right on. Well, I appreciate you taking the time. You've been a great guest. Hope you all out there enjoyed listening. By the way, you've heard me say it before, we want to share and celebrate great stories and great people that we have in education in Nebraska. So if there's somebody you know that you want to hear on the podcast, don't be shy about dropping a line to Mike at NCSA or myself, and we'd be glad to reach out to those people. Until next time, thanks for listening to the NCSA Radio Podcast. And if you want to hear more, just go to our archives and listen to the great episodes we already have.